Hi, and thank you all for joining this LebNet webinar on
Prem, do you want to hold off? We don't have the attendees in yet. Just hold off 1 second. Okay, the attendees are coming in. Can you see them, Prem, on your end?
Yeah, they're starting to come in.
Yeah, they're at 10 right now.
15, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go on mute, and you may want to wait a minute for everyone to join, and then you can get started.
Okay, I think we're going to get rolling here. Thank you all for joining this LebNet webinar on the web journey to Web 3.0. And a big welcome to our esteemed panelists here who will introduce themselves shortly. My name is Fram Ai'i, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. I'm the president of June Technologies, and I have over 35 years of experience in the electronic and semiconductor industry. LebNet is focused on helping Lebanese technical professionals across North America, Canada, and the US to grow and succeed. And LebNet does this through a unique combination of networking, connecting back to Lebanon, and nurturing the next generation of entrepreneurs. And so for more information, please go to lebnet.us. Today's webinar is hosted by the LebNet Toronto community, 3 of whom have joined us in today's discussion, so welcome. And today's webinar is part of an ongoing series of webinars that LebNet has been running on several interesting topics, ranging from cryptocurrency and blockchain to 5G and digital transformation to genomics and precision medicine. If you've missed any of the LebNet webinars, I strongly encourage you to go back and watch them. They're all available on LebNet's YouTube channel, as will this webinar approximately 24 hours from now. Just a few housekeeping items. Everyone other than the panelists will be muted. At any time, if you have questions, please send them via the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. We'll select a few of these to address in the last few minutes of the webinar. And if you have any logistical issues, please send Janine Ai'i a chat message, and hopefully we'll get all of that cleared up. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to each of the panelists to do a short introduction on themselves. And Fadwa, I'd like you to kick it off.
Thank you, Fram. Thank you for this session and for all what LebNet is doing, to build the technology acumen for all of us. So very honored to be here. I'm Fadwa Mohana, CEO and co-founder of 137. Our raison d'etre is delivering digital trust. We're all about allowing and empowering enterprises and individuals to exchange data in a safe, secure, trusted, and reusable manner. We proud ourselves in being one of the early companies of Web3 and really all about ushering digital trust.
Very good. Thank you very much, Fadwa. Jamil.
A common now thing is we always hear, I can't find the mute button, so I couldn't find the mute button. Jamil Mina, and I'm in the role of a chief architect with a software company called Red Hat. And prior to joining Red Hat, I worked for about 24 years in the banking industry and technology, And there is a rule in my house, actually, since the pandemic has started, is around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time, either a cat will knock at my door or a dog starts to howl. And that's what you're hearing in the background. So it has been a common occurrence that happens after 5 o'clock. I don't know why. And so I pride myself that I'm first generation Canadian. I've been living in Canada for the last 35 years. I'm in Toronto since 2001. I moved from Montreal in Quebec City, and looking forward to be on this panel with very talented groups such as Shadia and Fadwa and Frame.
Very, very good. Thank you, Jamil. Shadi.
Thanks, Fram. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. Thank you to LebNet for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our chat today with my colleagues. Jamil, it used to be that at 5 p.m. I used to have the people mow the grass, but I live in Montreal and the grass is not growing anymore in November. It's so cold. So there's no risk of grass being mowed outside. A little bit about myself. I guess I'll do it very quickly. I'm an engineer by training, but I fell in love in technology very early in my career, and I've stayed in tech and digital for most of it. About half my career, I've worked on the dark side, which is consulting. Just kidding, it's not that bad. And then on the other side, as a client who buys those services, so CIO, CDO in banking, manufacturing, consulting, and now a large engineering firm, it's called WSP. About 70,000 people on all continents, and WSP helps organizations that want to, ranging from building buildings to nuclear plants to airports to desalination plants, figure out how to do it. I own technology and digital and a couple other areas in that space. I live in Montreal. I have 2 kids, and I'm looking forward to our chat all together today on this thing called Web 3.0.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those introductions. Let's jump into it. And, the first place I thought would be a great place to start is maybe a little bit in the definition phase. We hear about Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. Fadwa, why don't you kick us off here and tell us a little bit about, how you see those definitions.
Absolutely, sure. So there is a common jargon in the industry about, we hear a lot Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. So why don't we just go back a little bit and remember the journey of internet? So Web 1 was really the inception. It was the whole idea of there is some information at universities, at centers, at research center that maybe somebody wants to access, maybe remote professors wanted to access some labs. And the idea was really just to allow you to access information. So it was with the jargon that we hear, TCP/IP, some protocols, and these were really the birth and the start of Web 1. This went on until the year 2000, when we ushered a new phase, Web 2. And it came really to define not only read-only mode, how access information in Web 1, but it was read and write. So the idea was this gave birth to all the gaming and the social big networks, the Facebook of the world, everything where you also as a person generate content and companies generate content and you access their websites and you also allowed to publish your data. It was more interactive, so it was more read-write mode. However, as we will come to see, of course, it gave enormous success. It gave the big 5 and it gave all these beautiful interactions. One big problem was what became more evident as we moved along is the ownership of the data. So when you are interacting with all these websites, who owns what? So when I log into LinkedIn, for example, do I own my data on LinkedIn, or LinkedIn owns all my interaction, my post, my reaction, everything I do on LinkedIn? Who does it belong to? So these questions started boiling, if you want, and it became flagrant that there was a missing identity layer. So when Web 1, if you want, was created, nobody cared who was logging in. As long as you logged in and we said, how do we log in? We started creating a solution called username and password. We said, in order for you to access this lab or this information, type a username and a password, and this will allow you to decrypt the information on the website. And of course, when Web 2 came, the big five again saw a big opportunity. And this gave rise to things like log in with Facebook, log in with Gmail, log in with LinkedIn. So this was their solution to the missing identity layer in Web 2. Of course, a big problem here is that when you log in with one of these companies, every single one of your interactions is tracked by the company you logged in with. So we gave the big five not only everything we do on their website, but now they know everything we do outside their website. There was a huge problem of privacy and security. So Web3, which was a term coined in the around 2015, it became much more used, was all about how can we correct the missing identity layer? How can we prove who you are when you log in? And how can we give you data ownership? So there is two big problems here: data ownership and data control. And Web3 is promising to solve both for data ownership and data verification. And this is kind of the tools, and all what we hear today about Web3 is really converging in the more privacy, security, and data ownership, and much more data control for the user. This is in a nutshell the summary.
Yeah.
Any questions so far?
Are any further comments from Jamil or Shadi they want to add?
Go ahead, Jamil. I have a couple comments, but go ahead, Jamil.
No, you go for it. You started. You have the microphone. You take it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I would throw in maybe a couple of things for us to think about in Web 3.0 that I think will have to happen, and we'll talk about that later, the consequences of it happening. You know, Web 2.0 was characterized by, I'll call it the middleman. So I spent 10 years in the banking industry. I'll give you a parallel. If you want to buy something, generally in most of the Western world, and for the most part in most of the world, you have to go through a third party. On Web 2.0, if you want to tweet, you're going through a third party called Twitter. Actually, right now, we're working through a third party called Zoom to interact with each other, and they own the IP of the whole interaction that we have together. One of the promises of Web 3.0, and we'll see in the coming years, is this notion of removing the trusted third party. And it depends on some of the things that Fadwa talked about earlier, is how do you decentralize it so that if we all find a mechanism to trust each other on Web 3.0, will we be able to interact, buy, communicate, work together, create IP, create startups without always depending on these third parties? So I would add this notion of decentralization as a big theme of Web 3.0. The jury's out as to whether that's actually going to end up happening or not. But I would add that one aspect. There's a couple other ones that are hovering out there, but I would add that aspect as a very key part of, I think, what some of the promises of Web 3.0 are. I'll talk a little bit more about the implications of some of those things later. Yeah.
And it's interesting because you, Shadi, and Fadwa, you both covered the decentralization aspect. And today, like there is a lot of reference to the concentration risk. Yeah, Fadwa, you mentioned the FANGs, the big five. You know, the concentration with the concentration to that risk, concentration risk with these companies is starting to take a center stage in terms of the risk and the impact on the economies of countries and the world. Like, for example, if you have all your healthcare, all your banking, all your defense with one cloud provider, that cloud providers get into conflict with your government, then there is that risk that comes from that perspective. So, and today we have a lot of compute capacity that is available out there. If you think about compute, is very ubiquitous, and we're talking about emerging terms, IoTs, digital currency. How do you secure that, and how do you ensure that we tap into that compute capacity that's available? Like, I look at my my PC that I use it only for web browsing that has infinite amount of capacity compared to what I used to have 10 years ago, that goes on top. Can I monetize it? Can I put that compute out there to be able to monetize it? But in today's Web 2 environment, that's not possible because everything is kind of proprietary and closed system with that third-party provider that we're going through. So how do we open that up to make it ubiquitous and available? It might need some sort of standard. We talked prior to this call as we were chatting, we talked about a lack of an international standard that could help open up that layer for everybody to be able to tap into. That could unlock a huge amount of a GDP that's currently closed because we don't have that capability to be able to interact and as individuals provide economical value into the economy. So that's interesting how it's going to evolve that Web 3.0, which I agree with Shadi, is still emerging, I think still going to take many shapes. We don't know what shape is going to land at, but it's going to enable the use cases such as autonomous driving, such as digital currency, such as digital healthcare, national digital ID, all of these things that come together.
So hold that thought. We've got our fifth panelist has joined us voice only, and I would like to have her do a short introduction on herself and whatever opening comments she might want to make here. So Marlene, are you on?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties and working with technology. I should know better. But hi, everyone. I'm very excited and grateful to be here and part of this webinar. So my name is Marlene and last name Saliba. I know some of you. So a little bit. Do you want me just to kind of introduce myself and give you a little bit of background?
Yeah, just a 60-second, 90-second introduction would be great. And if you have any comments on Web 3.0 introductory comments, and then we'll just continue with the discussions.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. I've been with BMO for almost 23 years in technology, just doing multiple, different initiatives. So my current role right now, I am part of the wealth management team. I manage, all aspects of the work stream, such as change communication, resiliency, experience, vendor performance, and people and culture. So it has been a really exciting ride, getting to know so many different people and, collaborating with, different stakeholders and LTO. So in terms of the webinar, I'll be totally honest, this is my first time attending a webinar. So, it's kind of exciting to see different perspectives on various areas and aspects. So I'm happy to kind of listen in and, share my feedback and, and we'll go from there. So over to you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for overcoming the technical challenges to get in here. It sounds like that's going to be some of the things that'll have to get done for Web 3.0, right? Is overcoming some technical challenges. But I wanted to key in, Jamil, right at the end, you were talking about the promise of 3.0, and you mentioned autonomous driving and some of these other things. And of course, we hear similar sort of comments about sort of other technology advancements, right? Things like 5G and 6G, things like quantum computing. I wonder if anybody on the panel has, thoughts or comments. Do the interaction between some of these other technologies in Web 3.0, independent dependencies, thoughts on that. And what's interesting too about some of these other things, particularly when you think about 5G or 6G, right? Very standardized organizations sort of defining and coming and doing collaboration. Sounds like Web 3.0, not as much, right? It's more of a consensus building in the industry. Thoughts by the panelists?
Yeah, and you forgot data center on a chip.
Data center on a chip. There, we could keep going. AI, machine learning, right? Robotics, Industry 4.0.
Sure, I'm happy-
Metaverse. I have to mention metaverse or else we're not complete.
So I believe 5G is essential for that revolution to happen. And 5G is here, but if you think of Internet of Things being at the edge, being able to compute and process a lot of data at the edge and be able to make decisions without IoT being ubiquitously available, that's going to be impossible to happen. And today we know that this will only happen if 5G takes place, for example. And I gotta admit, I don't know a lot about quantum computing. I'm not too much into it, but what I love about it is the fact that every encryption that we know about is going to become obsolete, and we have to go to the next level because it's going to be able to crack it in very fast amount of time, but it's going to give us a higher level of security that we can be able to participate more securely in that network and not having to have a big box to be able to encrypt and decrypt on our side.
Sure, I'm happy to chime in as well. So thank you, Jamil. The whole question frame is about the coexistence of all these technologies. So for example, do we see Web 2 and Web 3 contradictory or complementary? So do we see quantum complementary or all of these? My view is that we are going to see a lot of coexistence moving forward. And I don't see a war like we're not going to hear about a war between Web 2 and Web 3. I think there will be, at least for the next 10 years, coexistence in a big the relation will be much more synergetic, if you want, between Web 2 and Web 3. And some of these things, I'll give you a simple, I go back to this because really the access, like the username and password, just because it's kind of the most intuitive example. So today in Web 2, you still need the regular IAM of the word, like the big names providing you access, authentication, and authorization layer to enter into the enterprise, log in, and access all the areas of the enterprise that your login allow you to access. We see that Web 3, by bringing the decentralized access, is going to bring all the passwordless sign-on. You would not need to enter at all a username and password. We see the authentication layer being an extremely good case, powerful case for Web 3. In terms of authorization layer, we see that we need to maintain all the, the session control, and the authorization of this layer is very powerful in Web 2. So I see a world where we can use the authentication from Web 3 and the authorization from Web 2. So this is a case where I see a lot of synergetic relationship. And this is one example where we will see a lot of solutions that will offer Web 2 and Web 3 on the same infrastructure. That's some of the work we are building right now, is how to combine Web 2 and Web 3 in a very powerful way. Same thing with quantum. You know very well that there are some applications, like watching your movie on Netflix would be a complete wastage of any electrons or any qubit on a quantum. This is a serial transaction that needs to happen in a serial way. So you do it on the conventional computer. When you need to run very powerful transactions in parallel, you need a quantum computer. So for serial transaction, you keep using your conventional computer, which is much more efficient. For parallel, you use the quantum, etc. So we will reach a world where for every application, you will have the optimized technology to deliver on whatever application you're doing. It doesn't have to be one solution fits all.
Very good. Shadi, I don't know if you had comments you wanted to make as well.
Yeah, well, you started off, I completely agree with my colleagues. You started off with sort of bringing in a couple other items like 5G, like quantum, like IoT was mentioned, and many others. And frankly, we could probably do a webinar on each one of those words. And I would say on that topic, on three topics, the reason Web 2.0 existed because there was a prerequisite set of evolutions and technology, and the Web 3, whichever way it ends up happening, will exist because there is a set of converging elements. there's many things 10 years ago, if you think about my daughter is 6 years old. She can find out how to say in Lebanese any language by asking Google. She's 6 years old. She's talking to Google right downstairs. She tells, hey, Google, how do you say this in Arabic or whatever? Oh, look at that. My Google phone just answered. That less than 6 years ago was impossible. It was just impossible for a 6-year-old that's never talked to a machine to ask it and have it live answer that question. Why am I sharing this with you? There's a convergence of technologies, but if you don't mind, Fran and colleagues, I just want to bring it up. I think the next five years or so, we're going to see, and we always overestimate the short term, but underestimate the medium term, human nature. There's some really nice studies on this. I think we're going to see for the first time, and I'll tie it back to Web 3.0 in a second, the connection, and COVID accelerated this, the connection of the biological world, the physical world, and the virtual world like we've never ever seen it before. You know, today there are pills that people consume that tell your doctor whether you consumed it at the right time or not. Yeah. In Canada, for the first time in the history of Canada, we legalized remote diagnostics in the medical field, right? There are bridges being built today in North America that have 1 to 300 and automatically call its own maintenance, right? Whereas before we sent, is it vibrating? Well, the bridge now will call its own maintenance. And all that is happening because of a combination of things. Are you guys still there? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You were breaking up there a little. You're back.
Super. Why am I sharing all of that? And I think in the context of Web 3.0, we can zoom in on any aspect of those. But I think one of the things that's going to happen is this convergence between these three areas. And we've never seen it ever before. And it's exciting, like Web 2.0 brought a lot of value to society. You know, my mom can keep in touch with family all across the world from the comfort of her room. We can now have a chat with a doctor from the comfort of our room. We can have things delivered to us. We can find the best thing across the world. But I do think the next stage, which is going to happen very fast because speed is accelerating, will also ask us as a society, and I'd like to eventually take the conversation into this space, to really reevaluate the weaknesses of Web 2.0 and how it has not benefited society, and for us to reevaluate some of those dimensions. And when I see those along three different areas, you know, economic models, there's nothing free in life, right? You know, the adage, yeah, it's really cool, we can do all of this, but we are the product of Fadwa's point. It's our data is actually not private. It's being used on a day-to-day basis. You talk to any insider in ways that you would never consent to explicitly. I think there's some question on how the economic models are going to evolve. Social models, we're having, you know, some very deep debates socially that are limited to 120 characters, and maybe that's not the right way for us to do that in society. So what do we want to do? By the way, all of you that are in the technology field in the audience, there's some tremendous, spectacular opportunities in fields that are not just in tech, because there's a lot of these questions that are going to involve mental issues. If you look at the hikikomori phenomena in Japan, yes, it's not completely correlated to technology, but there is a correlation. Kids staying at home, inside the home for over 6 months without exiting the home is now a defined condition that we have, you know. Do we still need to have psychologists that are working hard on dopamine and engagement models working for, I won't name the companies, these companies that are Web 2.0 to maximize engagement, or do we want to have a different model? So yeah, this whole social impact. And the last is the exciting part, the technology models have to evolve. What Fad was referring to, how do we deal with authentication? How do we deal with decentralization? How do we deal with these things to support that I think economic models and social impacts have to evolve. We have to learn a little bit from also what we did not do well as a society in Web 2.0. But there's a lot of exciting stuff, obviously, quantum computing, IoT, and other areas. I'll stop there. I talked too much. You got me?
Shadi, what I hear between the lines here, you're talking about the wealth gap that Web 2.0 has created. Web 3.0 might take a chip at it by decentralization. Does not mean only decentralization of technology, but decentralization of the business model, where small players can participate into that ecosystems and not be left out. So did I catch that right?
Yeah, I would say I break it down into three. There is a wealth gap. I would fit that in the economic models. You're absolutely right, Jamil. Today, if you look at the most powerful nation in the world over the last 20 years economically, its GDP has doubled, but the middle class earning power has gone down 30% over the last 20 years, right? So you eventually socially that's going to catch up with you. That's an economic model. So I agree with you. But then even socially, if you think about mental elements, and people are now starting to talk openly about them. I think we will talk as a society about the impact of technology on children, like we talked about smoking 5 years ago. We'll talk about that in about 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We'll talk literally about, the mental impact of technology on kids, for example. So there's the social aspect as well, Jamil, that I would add to that, that I think is really important to consider. And frankly, it creates a lot of opportunity for people who are passionate about tech, society, and economics, because it's not just about the code, the programming, the tech, the integration. It's all now merging together. When you merge the person, the society, the economic models, and the physical things, and I'm sure we're going to solve it. I'm optimistic. The humanity does really well when it's challenged, but we got to think about it also as the things that we got to do better for the next stage.
I want to kick this over maybe to Marlene to see if she's got any thoughts or comments.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. It's actually, it's just a comment. I feel like, in my personal opinion, really, we as a human have definitely came far and long way. So in my opinion, both Web 2 and Web 3, and which one is better, really, I think there's both added a lot of benefits but one focuses, more on the social media, right? In terms of, what is the focus, which is Web 2 is more on the community focus, versus with Web 3, there is more focus on the, on the end user's perspective, right? So users have more control over their data versus, with Web 2, network has control over our data. So really, both of them, have benefits, obviously, it just really, it's a different way of, accessing the internet and navigating through it.
So back on Web 2.0, Fadwa, I'm going to maybe direct this to you and then kick it around to the rest of the folks. I'm sure there were some adoption challenges on Web 2.0. And so I'm curious as to what adoption challenges 3.0 will share maybe with 2.0, and then maybe what are some of the unique adoption challenges, right, that 3.0 is going to have to figure out.
Yes, that's a good starting point. So Web 2 took really the last 20 years to build, so the way we interact today with the internet, the way we access information, it also on the enterprise side took a long time to build. So everything you hear about the server, the mainframes, and how it evolved into the cloud, data sharing, all the challenges that you hear about, a surge in data, and how like some sites, go down when there is so much traffic, and all these challenges, of course, are part of the Web 2 architecture. Now, moving forward, what is Web 3 trying to solve here? Web 3 is saying that we do not need to have those centralized databases where we are all accessing, and in the case of a surge, this database goes down, and all the hacks and all the the bad stuff that we hear about when there is either a normal outage because some link went down, or because there is a very high traffic, or there was a hacking or bad activity going on access to a certain database. So Web3 is saying we do not need to have such centralized base of information. Everything needs to be decentralized. So whether be it the information or the enterprise that you're trying to access would not have, like, if you want, a single point of failure. So we can have a decentralized way of getting all the data that we need from an enterprise side, But most importantly, and that's the biggest change in architecture here, is the user. So where is my data residing? Who has ownership of my data? And how I'm delivering this data to the enterprise? A simple example. For example, I'm booking a flight on any of the airlines today. So today you log on to the website of the airline, you enter your data, they send you a boarding pass, etc., etc. That's how the process. In the way we are envisioning it under a Web3 architecture, you have already all your data in your wallet, in your digital wallet, which is residing on your phone. You are always in possession of your data. The minute you interact with the airline agency, and there is your agency and the airline agency, just exactly like, actors, they have agents that deal with all their contracts. This is how the interactions really happen. My agency talks to the agency of the airline, and they agree on which information need to be exchanged to complete the issuing of the boarding pass. And this request comes to my digital wallet. I press an explicit consent, and that's the key. That's the root of trust in Web3. I have to press consent before my data goes out from my wallet under my control to the airline. But by sending my data to the airline in an encrypted and trusted way, the airline knows that I'm a real person, has enormous savings on proving that I'm not just a bot or a random person trying to hack into their system, but a real passenger who wants a real boarding pass. So by exchanging trusted, digitally signed, digitally trusted data to the airline, there is what we call ushering in, if you want, the web of light. In contradiction, of course, with the dark web. This was like where you lose the ownership of your data and you have no more access to it. We would like to usher the web of light, meaning the enterprises are trusted. I know I'm sending my data to the right airline, and the airline was trusting real passenger with real data, exchanging information. When we have a lot of these participants sending all this trusted data, which are all digitally signed, we need to, of course, have to answer you more directly. So we need to know who issued the trusted data first. Why can I trust that this is Fadwa, first name, last name, Mohanna, that's her date of birth? How do I know that this data is accurate and trusted? And the fact that we need an issuer, like somebody needs to say this is Fadwa and digitally sign this data, so that I, as a holder of this data, can now exchange it with the airline and they can trust it immediately. So the challenges for adoption under Web3 would have really to install the model of trust, like who are the agencies talking to each other, who determine who can trust who. So how can the airline trust who is Fadwa Mohanna, who gave me this credential that sits in my wallet that are digitally signed? So one of the first things we need to solve is the root of trust and the trust model, like who can trust who and for what information, who is authorized to issue information. So this is, if you want, what's been for the last 3 to 5 years, that's been the main things we are solving to usher in this new, if you want, web of light, trusted exchange information.
Jamil or Shadi?
Yeah, I'm gonna go this time. So for me, adoption is a people problem. So that's the first and most important thing. It's about people. How do you get people to use new technology that we're not aware of it? So basically, if you follow the unconscious competence model, is how do you take them from unconsciously incompetent to consciously competent? It's like a mouthful here, and my Lebanese is kicking in, and I cannot pronounce the word. So how do you take them there to be aware? And in Web 2.0, that was a problem that organizations had to solve. A company, I remember back in the day when, before even the FANGs, when we talked about online banking back in the day, and now I'm showing my age, is that was something impossible that was never going to happen because people would not abandon the branches. But there were some disruptors in the marketplace that probably do not exist anymore as financial institutions. And I'm thinking here of, I think, Washington Mutual, that was one of the leaders in that space. And basically, broke it open by spending a lot of money in terms of marketing, education, having people being coached and mentored coming in into the branch and helping them with these things to get to adopt that Web 2.0. So that was the challenge that was solved by the organizations themselves in order to increase the revenue potential and increase the net income. So with Web 3.0, going back on Fadwa's point around trust, this is going to be, in my opinion, a society issue. How do we get the whole society working together to create that trust, to exchange within a marketplace in an anonymous but trusted way? Think about it, anonymous but trusted way. So a good example, I was reading a paper, I think yesterday, it's called The Age of Consent, was produced by a banker from Citibank about the age of consent. And they used an example of Sweden. Sweden, the banks in Sweden came together and they created something called a bank ID. And that bank ID has become trusted that even governments and smaller private organizations are starting to use. To a point that between the age of 21 and 60, 100% of the population between the age of 21 and 60 use it for their banking services, for public services from the government. And they estimate, based on a certain model, that about it unlocked between 5 to 13% of GDP just by going through that trust model and that trusted issued ID to be able to enable the exchange. And Sweden, it's on its way by 2025 to become a cashless society. Everything is digitally transferred with no money being carried. The opposite of Lebanon. I was in Lebanon. I had a stack of Lebanese pounds in my pocket like that to be able to spend and buy things. So we're going towards that cashless society, and that's part of the fundamental things to enable as we get to Web 3.0, because Shadi referred to it. It's still emerging. We still don't know it. And Fadwa referred to the digital ID, which is the core at the base of it to enable the whole thing, to enable that trust.
So before I go over to you, Shadi, I just want to encourage our attendees. If you've got any questions, please feel free to post them. We're going to keep going, but I'll be monitoring and looking for any of your questions. Shadi?
Yeah, I would add, by the way, there's no taboo subjects on this topic. This is very big. So anything you want to ask, just throw it out there. And, if you want to hurl insults at me, just send them over. Or if you want to hurl compliments at Fadwa and Jamil, you can do that. Yeah, I would. So the trust question and the both infrastructure and ecosystems to put trust, I think, is a key barrier, not barrier, but an element that needs to get solved in Web 3.0. I want to come back. I would add to that two dimensions that I think we need to think about. Again, if we go back to the fact that in Web 3.0, decentralization, giving ownership back to democratizing, if you will, the value chain, if we all agree that that's a characteristic of 3.0, then I would submit to you that are two spectacular barriers that we have to all figure out how to solve, and it's going to take innovation, it's going to take willpower to solve. The first one is economic models, all right? So I won't name names, but I worked for banking for 10 years. There is zero economic incentive for banking to remove itself as a trusted party in all transactions. There's big tech, there's zero economic incentive for big tech to remove itself in the way it's interacting today. You all know this. You do a search on any one of the big engines, or you do an interaction, or you watch a specific thing, and the next day you're getting pushed ads and so on. The monetization model is very, very simple. I analyze every single part of your behavior, your sociodemographic elements, and I use it to sell advertising and ultimately sell products, right? So that model has to evolve to something else, which brings me to the second element. About 6 years ago, I was involved in a little bit of a study in Europe and North America, and we asked people, us, the consumers, in Europe and North America, a very simple question. We said, you have two paths. Give us your data and we'll give you convenience. I won't get into the specifics because I don't want to get into the company that was doing it. Give us your data for free and let us analyze it, and you get all these convenience things, and you can think about all the convenience that we all have by giving our data for free today online, or you pay a very, very, very tiny fee, and you get to decide how your data is owned, and you have a little bit less convenience, but you decide who's going to offer you convenience. What's interesting in North America, overwhelmingly, people are willing to give their data away for convenience. They don't want any sense of financial barriers. In Europe, the majority still is the same as North America, but it's lower, right? So they're a little bit more sensitive to using personal data. I share that with you because eventually we as human beings have to decide, is that important to us that we want a model, a new model where we own everything about ourselves, behaviors, where we move, who is my mom, my sister, and all that stuff, what are my buying preferences, or am I okay continuing to share it so it's monetized elsewhere, in which case we got to think about whether it's really going to get decentralized. And the last part is just, I'll close on that, is this notion of digital currencies. So there's a misconception today that central banking digital currencies are decentralized. They're not at all decentralized. They're just a digital equivalent of a central third-party mechanism that exists today. We just digitized it. It exists in many countries, right? And again, that's another hurdle. These central banks eventually have to decide, are they comfortable? And as you all see currently in the news, right, fewer decentralized currencies in the consumer space have their challenges, right? So three big barriers, I think they're all solvable. I think it's just going to take time, and these models have to change before we see movement.
Marlene, I want to kick it over to you maybe for some comments.
No comments. I'm actually learning a lot from hearing from all the professionals.
Okay, great. We're starting to get some questions in. Here's one I'll pose to the panel. How long will a user's data be managed in Web3? For example, once a user is deceased, who owns the data? The descendants, or any feedback or comment on that question?
Yes, sure. So under Web3, there is always, I spoke before about the concept of agency. So when my data if you want, is run by my agency. And within that, there is an existing mechanisms of who can access my data, who has, it doesn't need that a person has passed away, but even if the person becomes incapacitated or this person is sick at the hospital, who is allowed to access the data. So all this digital ownership of your own digital data, we have existing mechanisms of you setting the rules of who can access your data. So this is one of the issues that has been tackled very early on.
And I guess if you don't set those rules, then they fall to some sort of legal default of ownership, right? State by state, country by country.
Yes. And just one last addition here on the when you spoke before about the impediments about adoption, and rightfully Jamil and Chadi mentioned the human behavior, whether do we want to own our data, whether do we want to control who can access, etc., etc. And the first part of my answer was more on, from a technology, what architecture would make that possible and how do we solve this from a technology perspective. I would say part two of my answer, and just going back to questions like this, for example, who owns my Facebook, my LinkedIn, everything when a person passes away, who accesses this data, who can today have all this, if you want the bulk of your data, who can do, what do you do with it? And there's a lot of things we're leaving behind now. Our records, if you want, is digital. So who owns this and how do we control it? And yes, we will come to a time where there is, your digital image will surpass your physical presence, things Shadi mentioned. So you mentioned metaverse briefly. So now there will be the equivalent, there will be my version in the metaverse, and this version can live indefinitely. It has nothing to do with my physical presence. So who owns the data and let's say the revenues and the economic model of my interactions in the metaverse? Because these options are limited, and then we need the model to monetize. Going back to You mentioned, sorry, Fred.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, we have another question in here. Are there any existing companies?
Hold on. Before we move on,
Yeah,
I wanted to talk about this question is interesting because it's almost like crystal balling of who owns the data, where the data is going to live. It's in Arabic we say تضرب بالحجر تعرف شو بده يصير. It's if I'm a betting man and I would like to make a guess, I would say crypto, decentralized blockchain, decentralized general ledger would come into place at one point in here. That's what we talk about, blockchain. Where if my data is held in the chain somewhere where I'm the only one that can unlock it and provide someone with the key to unlock it, to be able to read it for a certain service that I need, I could say that my data will reside with me somewhere and will disappear the minute I disappear, or it's like all that billions of dollars in bitcoins that people cannot access because when they bought it at $1, they lost the key for it and it became at thousands of dollars. So something along the line might emerge, but this is like, we're talking about crystal balling here.
Maybe just to add just some information that could be helpful. Some countries and regions are already regulating this stuff. I'm sure you all heard of Europe, GDPR2. They've answered the question. You own the data, the citizen. You have a right to be forgotten. You have a right to tell any of these companies that you don't want your data to be shared. You have a right to say that when I die, it should be all removed, right? You also have a right to consent for your data to be used whichever way they want. And that's unfortunately what most people are opting for because they're not going into the details of their T's and C's when they're looking at it. But GDPR2 and Europeans tend to be a little bit ahead on this, and some countries in Europe tend to be quite advanced in being very prescriptive on digital data and digital content, by the way. And they have about 6 or 7 really, really strict rules on whose data is it. And for the most part, it's yours, except if you consent for it to be given to somebody else. And unfortunately, a lot of folks are consenting to that. But in Europe, you have quite a bit of interesting protections and very, very big penalties to companies that do not respect those rules. They're percentages of revenue. They're actually quite penalizing. I just wanted to add that to the
sure. Kind of 2 related questions. So there's one question here that says, are there any existing companies or products that are already following the principles of Web 3.0 design? Trying to get ahead of the, and then kind of a related question is, the question is, who owns the data and the solution? Not sure as a user and owner of that data, I would trust a for-profit company to own my data. The examples of Facebook and Google are great examples of how for-profit models can sometimes run amok.
Yes, sure. I would like maybe to start the answer and my colleagues can. Definitely data ownership is the answer is you own the data. That's the promise and the premise of Web3. Data resides on your phone. Jamil, just a small addition to what you said, your data is never on the blockchain. Your data is always in your digital wallet. That's a very big difference. And also in data protection. So your data will always reside on your phone, under your control. It's owned by you and you can give through your agency who is authorized to access it. So this is very, very clear. On question number 1, are there companies already using Web3? Yes, there are hundreds of companies today that are already, there are various models of Web3, whether it's DeFi or whether it's around digital identity or whether it's solving, a particular sector like travel, if you want, under Web3 or health, or there are companies today either specialized by sector or infrastructure companies, people who are trying to solve digital identity at large, if you want, not being today focused on banking or on health, but saying, first, we need to solve digital identity. This is the keystone. If we solve digital identity, everything else is manageable. So, of course, one more example would be our company that is focused on Web3 digital identity, 137.
I would throw a couple of names for you there, more in the consumer space. Fadwa already covered some of the business space. There's a couple of browsers out there right now that are claiming to protect you completely from any tracing or reuse of your browsing data. No, Chrome and all the others do not. They actually use it for you. So you know, things like Epic, I think Brave at some point was trying to do that as well. In the metaverse world, we haven't talked a lot about it. And I think I'll give you some names, but I think those names are going to change because I think that space is going to go up and down as we all get comfortable with truly decentralized currencies and ownership. But Decentraland, for example, is a very, very common platform where theoretically you own not only your data, but you own actually logical assets that are monetized inside a virtual place. So a couple of places that you can look at, and there's equivalents in sort of consumer space, but also business space. Yeah. Decentraland, for your information, is the place where I think, I can't remember, was it Nike or another big brand spent a couple $1 million to buy a virtual lot of land to advertise in. And legally they own that land in that virtual space, the Decentraland, if you want to check it out. There's a couple others, by the way. I think some of these are going to disappear. I just want to give you some examples.
We have a question just came in. How do you think banks are going to adopt digital currencies? Are they going to make their own currencies or adopting a stable coin such as, you know, Tether or something else?
Good question. So if you think of today of the Bitcoin of the world, you know, the digital currency, this is the way I describe it, it's almost equivalent to how the banks used to issue notes back in before central currencies, before fiat currencies. So, you know, you would go to a bank, you say, okay, issue a note for me that I have that much money. I would travel from Montreal to New York. I present the note, and then they move the gold over from one bank to another. So we are at this stage. So there is a lot of talks about CBDC, central bank digital currency, and Shadi referred to it earlier, which would be based on kind of the same technology, the crypto technology. So they're still solving that problem in terms of how to introduce CBDC without eroding the values of the commercial banks. Because if you implement a model where your wallet is sitting with the central bank, then the deposit is bypassing the commercial bank. If the deposit is bypassing the commercial bank will not have money to be able to lend to create economical value, such as lending businesses, allowing people to buy houses and mortgages and loans. So they need to figure out that model, how to deploy it, either in a totally central model or a decentral model. And one aspect that is extremely important into digital currency, we're living it today, is the monetary policies. How does a central bank manage central monetary policies by creating liquidity or removing liquidity from the market to manipulate the interest rate to control inflation? So all of these problems have to, in my opinion, have to be solved centrally with the help of the commercial banks. And I don't think commercial banks will be doing it on their own. And when I speak to my buddies in the banking industry, they tell me, hey, in Canada, we are already digital. I use my debit card all the time. I use my credit card all the time. And if I have cash, I lose it. I don't know what to do with it.
So I want to wrap up maybe with sort of one last open-ended question, which is there a Web 4.0? Or maybe another way to ask it is, what will Web 3.0 not quite achieve?
So to be honest, as a marketing stunt, the previous founder of Twitter has launched something called the Web 5. So they jumped Web 4. They went straight into Web 5, you know. So it's all really focused about more data ownership, more privacy, more security. I think this is the direction. And every layer, just like, you know, 1G, 2G, 3G, every layer would bring more. But I think the direction has been set. That's my personal view.
Marlene, I'll turn it over to you maybe to see some comments on, you know, Web 3.0 and beyond, our next webinar.
Yeah, I honestly, guys, I gotta be totally transparent. You know, listening to some of the folks on this call, I kind of learned a lot because, you know, the way I view the web journey regardless from 1 to 3, is, there's a lot of benefits, of course, and the way, we, convert into the human language, right? From it, also, I think there is a lot, like from a banking person coming from a financial background, I think, regardless whether it's, it is all about digital transformation, regardless whether it is, 2.0, 3.0, or 4, right? It just, having to kind of, makes us rethink how we do things from a process perspective, right? As well as, how do we humans, adapt to the new technologies, and how can the new technologies that, comes every year, it works well with people, because there are so many different ways from a digital transformation, from a banking and financial services, right? There is the agile, there is the, cloud computing. There's so many different technologies on how, how they change the way we do financial and organizational work.
Cool. Shadi.
Yeah, I mean, I think you heard it in my undertones. I think our countries, our societies, our humanity, Web 3.0 will be a temporary phase we'll go through. I think our societies are going to be very soon ready for something that's a lot more balanced than the hyper economic and technological focus today that we associate internet and technology with. We're very, and rightly so, they've changed the world positively. I've spent my entire career in them, right? So the economics of it, the tremendous things ranging from startups to unicorns to creating of shareholder value to giving an opportunity of everybody to participate in the world, to the technology and exciting things that I can have my 6-year-old daughter talk live to something. I think the next stage after Web 3.0 is gonna have to unlock a third component that has been completely ignored, and I think is going to catch up with all of us, which is the social, societal, and humanity aspect of technology. And it's been ignored too long partially because of misunderstanding of a lot of people in certain roles. And this is where I'm excited. I think the next generation of folks who are close to tech, who of course care about economics, but are much more sensitive about well-being of our humanity and of societal issues, are going to bring that dimension, which has been sorely missing in the last decades of this phase. So I wouldn't call it Web 5.0 or 6.0. I'd call it something else.
Well, it's a good message, because I know, Shadi, we've got actually a number of students and early in career, and those words, I think, are very valuable for folks like that. Jamil.
Finding the mute button. I haven't thought about Web 4.0, to be honest with you, Frame. My thinking is not that far ahead. I'm just on the next step, and I just want to say a couple of things. Is like, I'm very grateful for this webinar. I learned a lot from this webinar. And a lot of people stuck with us through the hours. So hopefully that was valuable from my perspective. That's all I have to say.
Well, good. So I'll wrap this up. Say a big thank you to all of our panelists and attendees, and to the Toronto Lebanese LebNet community for hosting today's webinar. As I mentioned previously, you'll be able to watch this webinar along with the previous LebNet webinars on the LebNet YouTube channel. Thanks again, and best wishes to everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah, thank you.